Ever wonder how people kept track of time before smartphones? Medieval folks had a system so wild you won't believe it actually worked. Instead of saying, "See you on January 15th, medieval people might say, "Meet me on St. Hilary's Day," or after the feast of St. Agnes. That's right, their entire calendar revolved around dead holy people. Number 7, did you know they measured time by saints' backbones? The medieval calendar wasn't just about marking days. It was a complex system that blended religion, agriculture, and daily life into one colorful tapestry that guided everyone from peasants to kings. Imagine living in a world where the saints weren't just figures in church windows but actual timekeepers of your life. Medieval people didn't think of time as something linear that moved steadily forward. They experienced it as cyclical, following the rhythm of religious celebrations and farming seasons. The year wasn't divided into neat months with weekends off. Instead, it flowed through religious festivals, saints' days, and agricultural milestones that told people when to plant, when to harvest, and when to celebrate. The Catholic Church was the big timekeeper in medieval Europe. Their calendar was packed with hundreds of saints' days, feast days, and holy days. Each day of the year had at least one saint attached to it, and some days had several. These weren't just religious observances, they were the main way people marked time in their everyday conversations and planning. Lady Day, March 25th, celebrating the Annunciation to the Virgin Mary, was so important it marked the beginning of the legal year in England until 1752. Rents were due on Lady Day, servants were hired on Lady Day, and contracts started on Lady Day. This wasn't just a religious observance, it was essentially medieval New Year's Day for practical matters. The most important saints got the biggest celebrations. St. John the Baptist's Day, June 24th, wasn't just a church service, it was a massive community celebration with bonfires, dancing, and special foods. St. Martin's Day, November 11th, marked the beginning of winter and was when animals were slaughtered for winter meat. These weren't just random parties, they were essential landmarks in the year that everyone recognized. Number 6, would you believe their weather forecasts came from saints' days? Did you know medieval farmers used saints' days as weather predictors? It sounds crazy, but there was actual practical wisdom behind it. Farmers would say things like clear on St. Swithin's Day, clear for 40 days, July 15th, or if it rains on St. Medard's Day, June 8th, it will rain for 40 days after. These weren't just superstitions, they were early meteorological observations wrapped in religious packaging. Medieval weather forecasting through saints' days created a practical system that helped farmers plan. St. Urban's Day, May 25th, was considered crucial for vineyards. Good weather on this day was thought to predict a good grape harvest. Throughout Europe, different regions had their own local saint-based weather lore that had been developed through generations of observation. The calendar didn't just tell medieval people when to worship, it told them when to work. The agricultural year was divided not by months but by saints' days that signaled when certain farm tasks needed to happen. St. Gregory's Day, March 12th, meant it was time to prune vines. St. Benedict's Day, March 21st, was when spring plowing should begin in many regions. Even fishing and hunting followed the saints' calendar. Fishermen in coastal areas knew that certain fish were more abundant around specific saints' days, and hunting seasons were often defined by the church calendar. In England, deer hunting season traditionally began on St. John the Baptist's Day, June 24th, and ended on Holy Rood Day, September 14th. Medieval market days and fairs were scheduled around saints' days too. Major trading fairs often coincided with a local saint's feast day, bringing commerce and religion together. The famous Bartholomew Fair in London was held on St. Bartholomew's Day, August 24th, and the Stourbridge Fair near Cambridge was connected to the Feast of the Holy Cross in September. Number 5, can you imagine partying for 12 days straight at Christmas? Did medieval people really party for almost 2 weeks during Christmas? You bet they did. The famous 12 Days of Christmas wasn't just a song, it was a massive holiday season stretching from Christmas Day to Epiphany, January 6th, filled with feasting, games, special foods, and community celebrations that would make our modern holidays look tame. Christmas wasn't just a day, it was an entire season. The Christmas festivities officially began with Christmas Eve on December 24th and lasted until Twelfth Night on January 5th, followed by Epiphany on January 6th. During this period, normal work was suspended as much as possible, and communities focused on celebration, charity, and special religious observances. One of the wildest Christmas traditions was the Lord of Misrule, a peasant or commoner selected to preside over Christmas festivities, temporarily turning social hierarchies upside down. This person would direct feasts, games, and entertainments, often making mock commands to lords and ladies who playfully obeyed. This tradition recognized that the Christmas season was a time when normal rules could be suspended. Medieval Christmas had some seriously strange customs. In many European communities, young men would dress up in animal skins and masks to perform house-to-house visits, singing and performing in exchange for food and drink. These mummers or geysers were a central part of the Christmas tradition, bringing entertainment to communities during the darkest time of the year. The Christmas feast would blow your mind. For those who could afford it, the Christmas table might include a boar's head as the centerpiece, often decorated with bay and rosemary, various fowl like geese and woodcocks, spiced frumenty, a wheat porridge, and special Christmas breads. Wassail, a hot spiced ale or cider, was the traditional Christmas drink, often shared communally from a decorated bowl. Number 4. How did saints control your sex life and diet? Did the saints tell medieval people when they could get busy in the bedroom? Absolutely. The Church prohibited sexual activity on numerous holy days, the days before and after communion, during Lent, Advent, and other penitential periods. When you add it all up, married couples were expected to abstain from sex for nearly half the year. Talk about saints in your sheets. The medieval religious calendar created a roller coaster of feasting and fasting that would make modern dieters dizzy. Fast days when meat and sometimes dairy were forbidden included every Friday, the entirety of Lent, 40 days, Advent, the 4 weeks before Christmas, Ember days, quarterly fasting periods, and the vigils, days before major feast days. That's around 150 fasting days per year. Ever heard of Carnival? It wasn't just a party, it had a purpose. The word literally means farewell to meat, and it was the wild celebration before Lent began. Medieval people would feast excessively before the long 40-day Lenten fast, using up their perishable food supplies of meat, eggs, and dairy. This practical consideration turned into epic community celebrations that still survive today as Mardi Gras and other pre-Lenten festivals. Medieval feast days brought rare bright spots to otherwise monotonous diets. Special foods were associated with particular saints' days: pancakes on Shrove Tuesday, the day before Lent, hot cross buns on Good Friday, lamb at Easter, goose on Michaelmas, September 29th, and special cakes or breads on local saints' days. These weren't just treats, they were edible markers of time passing. Some saints' days became associated with specific activities or milestones. St. Valentine's Day was already gaining romantic associations in the late medieval period. St. Swithin's Day concerned weather forecasting. St. Crispin's Day became forever associated with battle after Henry V's famous victory at Agincourt in 1415. These associations created a shared cultural language everyone understood. Number 3, would you believe that Easter moved around like a wandering saint? Did you know Easter could fall on any date between March 22nd and April 25th? Unlike Christmas with its fixed date, Easter was a movable feast determined by a complicated calculation involving the first full moon after the spring equinox. This moving target then determined when dozens of other religious days would fall, creating a calendar chaos that needed experts to sort out. The calculation of Easter was so complex that special tables called computus were created to help clergy determine the correct date each year. Getting Easter right was critically important because it fixed the dates for many other religious observances, including Ash Wednesday, the beginning of Lent, 46 days before Easter, Pentecost, 50 days after Easter, and Corpus Christi, 60 days after Easter. Easter wasn't just a religious observance, it structured the entire spring season for medieval people. The pre-Easter period of Lent meant dietary restrictions, solemn church services, and spiritual reflection. Easter itself brought joy, special foods after the long fast, and community celebrations. The weeks following Easter included important agricultural milestones and the resumption of activities suspended during Lent. Rogation days, which fell on the Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday before Ascension Thursday, itself 40 days after Easter, were when priests and villagers would beat the bounds, walking the parish boundaries while praying for protection of the growing crops. This combined religious observance with the very practical purpose of teaching everyone, especially children, where their parish boundaries lay. Medieval calendars were stunning visual creations that helped people navigate this complex system of movable feasts and saints' days. Illustrated calendars showed the saints for each day alongside seasonal activities like plowing, harvesting, or hunting. These weren't just functional, they were beautiful works of art that depicted the rhythm of medieval life through the changing seasons. Number 2, can you believe they named days after martyrs' brutal deaths? Would you name your Monday after someone who was roasted alive on a gridiron? Medieval people did. Saint Lawrence, who according to legend was roasted alive and supposedly joked to his executioners, "Turn me over, I'm done on this side," had his feast day, August 10th, marked on every calendar and was one of the most venerated saints in medieval Europe. The gruesome deaths of saints weren't hidden away, they were celebrated and remembered. Saint Catherine, November 25th, with her breaking wheel; Saint Sebastian, January 20th, shot full of arrows; Saint Bartholomew, August 24th, who was allegedly flayed alive. These horrible martyrdoms were depicted in church art and widely known to everyone, including children. Their feast days were major calendar events. Saints weren't just religious figures, they were the superheroes and celebrities of the medieval world. Each trade, occupation, and situation had patron saints for protection. Farmers prayed to Saint Isidore, sailors to Saint Nicholas, blacksmiths to Saint Eligius, and pregnant women to Saint Margaret. If you had a toothache, you prayed to Saint Apollonia, who had her teeth knocked out during her martyrdom. The cult of saints created local identities and civic pride. Towns and cities competed to claim impressive saints as their patrons, building elaborate shrines and cathedrals to house sacred relics. A city's patron saint day wasn't just a religious observance, it was often the biggest civic festival of the year, with processions, plays, feasting, and community celebrations that united everyone from the poorest peasant to the wealthiest merchant. Saints' relics weren't just spiritual objects, they were economic engines. Pilgrimages to famous saints' shrines drove medieval tourism, creating entire economies around major sites like Santiago de Compostela, St. James, Canterbury, St. Thomas Becket, or Rome, Sts. Peter and Paul. Local saints' feast days brought visitors to town, boosting trade and creating regional fair days that structured the commercial year. Number 1, how did people count days before numbered calendars? Ever tried saying, "Meet me on the 5th kalends of March"? That's actually how ancient Romans dated things before the medieval period. The medieval calendar simplified this somewhat, but still often referenced days as the feast of Saint so and so, rather than using month-day combinations. Imagine trying to schedule your life without being able to say June 15th. The medieval day didn't start at midnight like ours does. It traditionally began at sunset, following the biblical pattern of evening and morning making a day. This meant that the evening of a feast day was actually the beginning of that celebration. Christmas Eve wasn't the day before Christmas, it was the start of Christmas. This sunset-based reckoning gradually gave way to midnight-based days, but the transition took centuries. Hours were counted differently too. Instead of having 24 equal hours regardless of season, medieval days used temporal hours, or unequal hours, that divided daylight into 12 parts and nighttime into 12 parts. This meant that daytime hours were longer in summer and shorter in winter. Only with the spread of mechanical clocks in the later medieval period did equal hours become standard. The weekly rhythm we take for granted was relatively new in the medieval period. The 7-day week with its pattern of 6 workdays and a Sabbath rest day became standardized throughout Europe during this time, though many regions maintained additional holy days and rest days attached to important saints or local patrons. The medieval year didn't even start on January 1st. Depending on the region and time period, the year might begin on March 25th, Annunciation Lady Day, December 25th, Christmas, Easter, a movable date, or September 1st. This meant that the same date might be considered different years depending on which calendar system was being used. Only gradually did January 1st become the standard New Year's Day across Europe. Did you know that medieval people lived their entire lives without ever knowing their exact age or even their precise birth date? Birth records weren't commonly kept until much later, so many people only knew they were born around the feast of St. John or the winter before the Great Storm. Without our precise dating systems, medieval people measured their lives by the eternal cycle of saints' days and seasons, a completely different way of experiencing time itself than we can imagine today. How would your life be different if you measured it not in years and birthdays, but in the passing of saints' feasts and the turning of nature's wheel?